Today I'm gonna show you my round 4 game from Ljubljanska Liga. I was having the white pieces and I was playing against Marian Cepek, who is roughly equal in his rating. So I started the game with 1 e4 and I didn't know what Marian is going to play because there are no games in the database, so I didn't know what he will play, but he played the most common reply to 1e4, which is the c5, the Sicilian defense. So after the Sicilian defense, I like to play a few things. There is of course the open Sicilian with knight to f3, trying to play d4 into the center, but this is very risky. The positions are very complicated and I don't know the theory so well. In the open positions of the Sicilian defense, there is of course the option of going for a close Sicilian with some maneuvering, like playing f4 in the future and maybe to the bishop on g2. But I decided to play one more silent that I haven't mentioned yet, and this is the move c3. This is known as the Aliapin Sicilian, and of course c3 is pressuring the center, and I'm trying to put my d4 pawn into the center, which I will do with the move pawn to d4. So after the c3, there are two options for black. There is this move d5, and there is this move knight to f6. So my opponent, Marian, in the game, played the move d5, and I took the pawn, of course, and after queen takes, I played the most natural move. That's why I played c3. I played the move pawn to d4. And there is a possibility to exchange these two pawns, but this is not very good for black. The most reasonable choice is to play something like e6 or knight to f6. So my opponent played e6, and in this position I know the theory pretty well, and there are a few lines. I chose to play knight to f3, and after knight to f6, this was what I was looking for to play. I really like these kind of positions, and after knight to f6, here I really like this move knight to a3. Of course, after we played the move pawn to c3, our knights cannot develop to c3, so there are options to play knight b to d2, or to develop these knights to a3, what I did in the game. And idea of knight to a3 is commonly to play knight to b5, if allowed of course, or knight to c2, just defending our center. So here I think the best move for black is to play something like a6 and not allowing me to play knight to b5. But my opponent took the pawn after like 10 minutes of thought. He played the move c takes d4, and I think he thought I will just take the pawn with, I don't know, the knight or with my pawn. But of course the best move in the position, that's why I played knight to a3, is in fact to play knight to b5. This is still theory, but I don't think my opponent knew the theory because he was thinking very much in the opening. So after knight to b5, we are of course threatening this fork, family fork, with the move knight to c7, check, and there is only one move in this position that holds the balance actually, and the move is knight to a6, developing a piece while protecting the threat of playing knight to c7. But here my opponent thought for like 10 minutes as well. He played this move bishop to d6. And after bishop to d6, of course he is defending the c7 square, but this bishop is very loose here, and of course it is only defended by a queen, and the queen is the least favorable defending piece because it is very easy to undermine the queen and force it to move. So maybe you can pause the video and try to find which move I played. I played the best move by far, and of course pause the video to try to find it. The move is bishop to c4. Of course sacrificing the bishop, although this is not a sacrifice, because if queen were to take this bishop with queen takes c4, I would have this knight to d6 check, of course picking up the bishop and this fork as well. And when the king would move, I would just take the queen and would emerge winning position, of course. So after bishop to c4, my opponent had to play something like queen to c5, and queen to c5 is the only move actually. And after queen to c5, my best attempt to win this bishop was to play b4, and still this bishop cannot be taken because of knight takes d6 check and picking up the queen. And after b6, the only move is to play queen to b6 for black. But in the game after bishop c4, my opponent played queen to c6. Very logical move, of course, but queen to c6 of course allow me to play knight f takes d4, attacking the queen again. And here I was looking at all these queen e4 checks, but queen e4 check, let me just put it on the board, queen e4 is not really dangerous because I can play king to f1. Of course I lose castling rights, but look at this development that I have. I have a big initiative, of course a big pressure on the bishop on d6, on the c7 square, and this queen is roughly uncoordinated on e4. So queen e4 was the top engine move. After queen to c6, knight f takes d4. We just looked at queen to e4, which is the top engine move, but this is very bad position for black to hold. But my opponent made another mistake with queen to d7. And after queen to d7, you can see queen to e4 was the best move. After queen to d7, you can pause the video one more time and see what the winning idea in this position is. After this move, the evaluation of the position is +3 for white, which is winning with the best play, I think. And after queen to d7, I found the best move, which was to sacrifice the knight with knight takes e6. Of course, a very basic tactic, just unleashing this attack on the bishop, and this was a discard attack because of knight takes e6. The queen now sees the bishop, and this bishop will be taken by my knight. So after knight takes e6, a great move by the chess.com game review stats. After knight takes c6, f takes c6, and of course knight takes d6. From of course, I played perfect game up to this point, 11 moves of perfect game. But of course, after knight takes d6, my opponent played king to e7, and here is where I made my first. I cannot say it's a mistake, but let's say it inaccuracy. In this position, I should have played something like bishop f4, which is a winning move in this position. And bishop f4, I looked at this game, I was analyzing it, and I still don't know what bishop f4 is, why it is so powerful, and why it is the best move by far. So let me just put it on board. Bishop f4 is the best move, and I think the engine likes my knight being on d6 because it is a very powerful piece on d6, and bishop f4 is just probably defending this knight. I don't know, there is no straight material win or something that would guarantee me a win. Of course, I'm a pawn up, and this king cannot castle now, and bishop f4 being the best move after king to e7. But I played an inaccuracy. I took the bishop with knight takes c8 check. So knight takes c8 check, which is not the best move. The best move was, as I showed you before, bishop to f4, which I don't understand. Probably just defending this knight on d6. But anyways, I had a pawn up, and I thought trading pieces is good for me, and especially if I take his bishop and now I get the bishop pair against a pair of knights, which should be favorable for me, of course. And after knight takes c8 check, rook takes c8, of course you can see that my bishop on c4 is attacked. So here I played the best move. Again, I played queen to e2, just putting some pressure on the e6 pawn. And I thought that queen to c6 is no big deal, because I will just move my bishop, and if he takes on g2, this pawn will be hanging. Just let me show you. Queen to c6, something like bishop b3, and if here the black queen were to take on g2, I would take this e6 pawn, and after king to d8, something like rook to f1, and I thought this must be better for me because these pieces haven't moved in the whole game, and of course this king is very vulnerable. But of course after queen to e2, queen to e2, which was the best move, just defending the bishop and not allowing the queen trade to happen. After queen to e2, my opponent played queen to c6 indeed, and after queen to c6, I made a big blunder that cost me the game. Here I thought that this king is very vulnerable, and that if I play b3 followed by bishop to a3, I get a very big initiative and a very big attack on the king. So I played the move b3 in 2 minutes, and b3 of course loses the game on the spot, or maybe not on the spot, but it is completely lost, and you can try to find why. After b3, my opponent instantly played the move b5, and I knew that I'm going to lose this game. So after b5, I was thinking for like 20 minutes. Of course, the position is very bad in this position. So after 20 minutes of thought, I made this bishop to a3 check. Of course, there is only one move. This is the king to f7 that my opponent played instantly as well. And in this position, of course, I'm going to lose this bishop, and that's why b3 was so bad. After b3, of course, b5, and I cannot move my bishop because of the c3 pawn being hanging with a double attack on my king and on my a1 rook. So as I showed you, after bishop a3 and king to f7, the only move. Now I had a chance to get some practical chances in the endgame. I should, of course, take this e6 pawn and just trade everything on e6, and then playing something like bishop to b2 or just long castles, although long castles loses the pawn on c3, so something like king to d2, and I'm holding on to this pawn. I have 2 extra pawn, but of course my opponent has an extra knight, but I get some pressure down the e file and the d file, and this position, of course, it is lost by and it is a perfectly winnable position for black with the perfect play. But of course my opponent is not a chess bot. He will not play the best moves, and this position I think offers me some drawing chances for this endgame. So after b3, b5, bishop a3, and king to f7, I didn't take the pawn on e6, but I made this move, very interesting move, long castles. Of course, I knew I was lost here, but and of course my opponent took the bishop, of course with bishop takes c4, and I thought I had some pressure on the e6 pawn with my rook to d6, but that was my plan after the move long castles and after rook to d6, then I would be better, or at least equal, if my opponent wasn't able to play this move, queen to e4. So after the move b takes c4, I played this move rook h e1 first, with the idea of threatening the move rook takes rook to d6. But of course my opponent now can play c takes b3, and this pawn is hanging, so I played bishop to b4. I don't know what is this move, probably just a5 wins, but after a5 there is probably something like rook to d6, and the game goes on. Of course losing for me, but with some practical chances and attack on this king. So after bishop to b4, my opponent played knight to d4, knight to d5, I'm sorry. After knight to d5, I played queen f3 check, king g8, rook d4. Now I'm gonna just quickly show you the end of this game, because of course I'm completely lost here and analysis is not required. And after rook takes d4, b takes a2, threatening to promote this a pawn. Of course I play king to b2, knight to a6 was played, rook e to d1, just putting some pressure on this d5 knight, and after knight a takes b4, c takes b4, and after queen to c2, king to a2, and after knight to c3. In this position I resigned, because the only way to defend the checkmate pattern with queen to b1 and then promoting was to play queen to d3, of course offering a trade of queens, and this endgame is completely lost. My opponent has an extra pawn and an extra knight, and this pawn being on a2, of course. So that was my round 4 game of Ljubljanska Liga, on my way to achieving the highest title in chess, the Grandmaster title, of course. And make sure to subscribe if you like the video, and see you guys in another video.